Okay, so that closes our mini segment on fungi. The next section is on protozoa. Protozoa are single-celled eukaryotic organisms that are typically found in aquatic environments. Most are single-celled. They will contain all the major eukaryotic organelles that we talked about in our last installment. Their cytoplasm is usually divided into an outer layer called the ectoplasm and an inner layer called the endoplasm. The ectoplasm is involved in locomotion, feeding, protection. So this is important if it's making pseudopodia out here to kind of engulf its food. Well, we don't want the nucleus clear out here, so we need an area of the cytoplasm that's used for locomotion and feeding. It's more mobile. And then we have the endoplasm, that's the more stationary part of the cytoplasm that would hold key organelles like the nucleus, mitochondria, and vacuoles. Protozoa are typically, not always, but typically mobile, and they'll use a variety of different methods for locomotion, including pseudopodia, which is a false foot, flagella, or cilia. Protozoa will not have a cell wall. They will have a cell membrane, and this lack of cell wall makes them more flexible, which is good because a lot of them need this kind of shape-shifting capability to help feed. Their cell shape can remain constant. So if it's a ciliate, has lots of cilia on the outside, it will have a very defined shape. Whereas amoebas can constantly change shape. That's the one you see in the background here, where it's kind of a free form cell. Protozoa are on average between 3 and 300 micrometers in size, though there have been some kind of horrifying discoveries that some are 3 to 4 millimeters, meaning you could see them by eye, which is kind of scary. The average bacteria, to give you a little context, is 1 micrometer. So they're at least 3 times as big. They could be 30 times as big or 4,000 times as big here as the average bacteria. Protozoa are typically heterotrophic, meaning that they're going to be needing to eat their food. It needs to be a complex organic substance. The free-living species that you might find in water or soil or things like that will be typically scavenging for dead plant and animal debris or grazing on bacteria and algae. So depending on if they're in the ocean or a lake or the soil will kind of depend on which one they're going for. Some protozoa will have special feeding structures known as the oral groove to help kind of force in those scavenged dead plant and animal debris towards kind of their mouth, basically, while others will just absorb them through the cell membrane. Pathogenic species that might be found within living organisms like ourselves will live on fluids from their host. So you might find pathogenic protozoa in your blood, in the plasma, or in the digestive tract, living off of digestive juices. They have a wide range of habitat. Protozoa can be found in, in the polar ice caps to the oceans. They have a wide range of locations, though the main limiting factor is that they need moisture for them to survive. Most will be found in fresh or marine water. They can be found in soil, some of them even in plants and animals. There are some that are extremophiles found in hot springs and ice and other bizarre habitats that have very high or very low pH. But again, the key thing that they need to survive is water. The protozoa have their own unique life cycle, and it starts with the trophozoite, which is the protozoa's motile feeding stage. Many species can enter a dormant stage in which they form a cyst when conditions become unfavorable. Typically, a condition being unfavorable would include not having enough moisture. And so if the trophocyte senses that they're running out of moisture or some other key nutrient, they can enter the cyst stage, and then they will go through this dormant stage and then come back out again when conditions improve. To become the cyst, they need to go through encystment, in which the trophocyte cell will round out, become more sphere-like, secrete a cuticle around the cell membrane, and this will help the cyst resist heat, drying out, or any chemicals. Okay, so this should sound decently similar, same kind of motifs or ideas to what we saw with the endospore production. It's not identical, but it's kind of a similar idea coming back. These cysts can be spread by air currents. So this is a key way for a lot of pathogenic protozoa to be spread. One example I have here is amoebic dysentery that often shows up in water supplies that are stagnant. When moisture and nutrients become available, these cysts will return back to their trophocyte active state. Okay, so to go back through the cycle, you have your trophocyte, your regular old protozoa with its flexible membrane, its organelles, it's living its best life. It senses that it's drying out or lacking nutrients, so it will round up, begin to form the cyst, and will mature the cyst by putting the cuticle around the outside. It will become dormant. And then when moisture returns, the cyst wall can break off and the trophocyte is reactivated and the membrane's flexible again. Some examples here too. We have Trichomonas vaginitis, an STD, does not form cysts. So this is interesting because not all protozoa will form cysts, and the ones that can't have to be transmitted very directly. So knowing whether the organism of interest forms a cyst can help you kind of determine its mode of action. So in this case, this STD has to be transmitted directly through contact because there's no sort of in-between dormant state. On the other hand, we have Entamoeba and Giardia that can form cysts. So these ones can live freely in the environment and are capable of contaminating water and food. Giardia often shows up in fresh water supplies. Like occasionally you'll hear a story of backpackers that didn't have a water filter with them. They found a stream, drank from it, and then they got this Giardia protozoan parasite from it. All protozoa will reproduce through asexual means, though some of them have the option of sexual reproduction. Ciliates, or ones that have cilia, hair-like protrusions on the outside, can participate in conjugation, in which their genetic material can be exchanged when two cells fuse. This conjugation or swapping of genetic material, again, helps with genetic diversity. That's the trade-off, again, between asexual and sexual reproduction. Okay, so we've seen that there are a variety of different protozoa. There's some that form cysts, some that don't. They can have flagella, they can have cilia, they can make pseudopodia, they can do none of the above. So there's a whole slew of different ones. They can live in high pH, low pH, polar ice caps, thermal vents, and all of this diversity makes it very difficult for taxonomists to determine and classify protozoa. Now that said, what they've fallen on is that there are four main groups and they've categorized them based on motility. So this is not a perfect way to categorize that, but we have to have some way to differentiate them, at least for our own understanding. So they've done it based on mobility. There are Sarcodina, which is known for their pseudopodia. These would be like the amoebas. Coelophora, they have cilia, the short hair-like protrusions all over the cell membrane. Mastigophora, they would have a flagella, like seen over here, these longer protrusions. for propulsion, and sporozoa, which have gliding motility or don't have a defined mode of mobility. Okay, so examples here, we have our amoeba with the pseudopodia, celiophora that would have the little cilia all around the outside, having flagella, and then we have our non-motile sporozoa that have to just use gliding mobility or move with the current. Okay, this takes us to our last section, the helminths. This would be worms. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, not all helminths are going to be microscopic. Clearly, if we were looking at a full tapeworm, we could see it with our own naked eye. Okay, the reason they're categorized in here is because their juvenile state or their eggs are going to be microscopic. Helminths include tapeworms, flukes, roundworms. And again, their adult species can be seen without a microscope. They can be 1 millimeter to a terrifying 25 meters long. Okay, think about how long a yardstick or a meter stick is. They could be 25 of those, which is really scary. Okay, helminths, eggs though, and their larvae are going to be microscopic. Not all are parasitic. In fact, many of them live freely in soil and water. There are two main groups. They're based on their body type or what they physically look like. You have flatworms, which are platyhelminthes that are very thin. They're going to have often segmented bodies. These would include things like cestodes that are tapeworms that are going to be probably more like those 25-meter long ribbon-like worms, and flukes that would have flat or kind of more oval-like bodies. Roundworms or nematodes are going to be elongated, more cylindrical, unsegmented. Okay, so examples here, we have our tapeworm out here, like you might find as a parasite. You have flatworms out here. You'll notice both of them have some way to connect and stay put within their host, some sort of sucker. You'll also notice that their reproductive organs are probably going to be the largest organ system. So they put most of their efforts into egg and sperm production. Hence, you'll notice that we have testes, uterus, all taking up the bulk of the physical space within the worm. You'll also notice that the testes and the uterus are on the same worm, indicating that many of these are hermaphroditic, meaning that they have both male and female reproductive capabilities. All helminths are multicellular animals, so they're going to have organs, organ systems, multiple cells involved working together. Pathogenic helminths are going to have the most developed organs, and of those organs, the most developed of those are going to be their reproductive organs. Okay, so a little bit on their life cycle and reproduction. They follow the track of most animals, which is you're going to start with a fertilized egg or embryo, which is going to then develop into a larval or juvenile kind of youth stage, then to a sexually mature adult. Most adult helminths will derive nutrients from their host, and they will also reproduce sexually within the host's body. In trematodes, flukes, those kind of smaller, more rounded flatworms, the sexes can be separate. So you could have a male worm and a female worm, or they could be hermaphroditic, meaning that they have both male and female organs in the same individual. Cestodes or tapeworms are generally going to be hermaphroditic. The completion of their life cycle is when they transmit their eggs or larvae to a new host. So we'll see in a minute on our image, but they go from making the egg to having a larvae to the adult to needing to find a new host to further propagate their eggs to go through the cycle again. An intermediate or secondary host is a host in which larval development occurs. The final host is the definitive host in which adulthood and mating occurs. They may not be the same. Sometimes they are, but not always. The transport host would be the intermediate host that moves it from one host to another and may or may not have any sort of negative impact, but it is a required link to get it from where the eggs are laid, where the larvae are produced, to where adulthood worms can be and where mating will occur. Fertilized eggs are usually released into the environment. They have a slight protective shell, a little bit of extra food to aid in the development of the larvae. But that said, they're still vulnerable to heat, cold, drying out, predators. Not all the eggs laid are going to result in adults. And that's true with pretty much any animal you look at. To combat this vulnerability, they just basically play the lottery and they buy lots of tickets. So Ascari, one variety of helminth, lays 200,000 eggs a day. So, I mean, you think about it, even if only 10% of them made them, you're still getting 20,000 eggs a day, which is insane. Humans often become infected by ingesting the worms. So maybe they're released into the environment, they're on your food or something like that, and you eat them, or in the water. They can also get into their host by penetrating the skin. Often if you go barefoot, you can get worms in your feet. Okay, so more pictures of their anatomy. So you'll have males and females here. They may look slightly different. One will be curled, the other one not, more straight. And they will have a very pronounced reproductive tract. So you'll have the sperm duct. You may have testes on here. This one would just be only male, not hermaphroditic. They'll also have a lot of the organ systems that you would expect to find in an animal, things like having a digestive tract or a basic neuronal system. Okay, so you can go through and see examples of them. Could be things like pinworms, blood flukes, fish tapeworms, things like that. And they can be spread to humans in a variety of ways, from fecal pollution to being bitten by insects to consuming raw meat. Okay, so we're going to follow one specific example, the pinworm. The pinworm infests the large intestines of humans, and these worms can range from 2 meters long to 12 meters long. They kind of have a tapered cylindrical shape. So you can see here, we have the curled one as the male, the more straight one here is the female. And so here's the path of infection that it would take. So maybe you have a child here that you're in charge of, and this child goes to daycare, okay? And they're playing with the toys or something, playing out in the yard, and they, as many small children do, put their hands in their mouth, okay? So this person swallows these microscopic eggs that are picked up from the environment or something, and these eggs will travel into the intestine where they're hatched, and they'll release larvae that will mature in their original host here into adult worms. This takes about 1 month. The worms will then mate, and this is the creepy part, guys, okay? Females will migrate towards the anus where they will deposit the eggs, like right outside, okay? Which will cause itchiness for the infected person, which, especially in children, okay, again, they can't help themselves. They will scratch the itch, okay, and the eggs will get under their fingernails, and then maybe they'll go to daycare again and be touching something else here, which will then infect the next kid. Okay, so we can go here. You can see how this cycle can move through, okay? All this to say, helminths can affect people of all ages. There are some, like the pinworm, though, that typically affect children. Okay, so with that, we have concluded chapter 4 on eukaryotes. See you back here next time.